Welcome to my channel. I'm Elizabeth Liz Muschett, and today we're talking about the 2025 Spring Equinox Aries Ingress. And my colleagues and fellow astrologers and friends, Madam Simon is here joining me, and Justin Crockett Elzie. Welcome, both of you.
Hey,
Thank
thanks,
you.
Liz. It's good to see both of you.
It is, and we have a great topic to discuss, so we're going to get to it if that's all right. So to get a hold of Madam Simon, her website is iconalchemy.com. My website is alightpath.com. And to get a hold of Justin, his website is justincrockett.lz. And we all enjoy hearing from you and doing consultations for you. So it's springtime, so I took a picture of some flowers. It's spring equinox just around the corner. And who would like to talk about this slide?
Go ahead, Simon. If you'd like to.
Thank you. So, the Aries Ingress, the spring equinox or vernal equinox, is the moment that the sun enters 0 degrees of Aries and crosses the celestial equator. For those of us in the northern hemisphere, that means the light's coming back. And for those of us in the southern hemisphere, the light will be receding. Okay. Equinoxes are twice a year, on about March 20th and September 22nd. And in terms of light and dark, they are where light and dark are balanced. So,
Thank you.
Yeah. Can I add something onto that just for a second? So, and for those who are watching our show here, podcast here, who don't know that actually this is kind of considered the new year or the beginning of the year because Aries is the first sign. So this chart we'll look at today, because the Ascendant is a fixed sign, will be serve until next year's Aries Ingress chart.
Thank you. So I have a quote. Behold, my friends, the spring is come. The earth has gladly received the embrace of the sun, and we shall soon see the results of their love. And that was by Sitting Bull. So, Justin, you want to talk about Aries, please?
Sure. So Aries is first sign in the zodiac, and it's a cardinal sign. Just like Libra, Cancer, and Capricorn, which are all cardinal signs, which are initiating and beginning. It's creative and initiates. Some archetypal keywords are leadership, visionary, beginning of cycles. They like to initiate things, especially if you have your Mars in Aries or Moon in Aries, Jupiter in Aries. Ruling planet is Mars. Element is fire, and the mantra is I am. It's about the self. Keywords are trailblazer, active, adventuresome, determined, liking to start new beginnings, pioneering. We see a lot of entrepreneurs with strong Aries things in their chart with planets in Aries. Caution or shadow side would be, there can be over getting the cart before the horse and too aggressive, too, lack of patience, and of course argumentative and chaotic. I'd be curious what you two ladies think about Aries a little bit.
Simon, do you want to add anything to that?
I have an Aries moon.
That's what I thought. So I was like, oh,
and it's my sect light, so I'm pretty Aries. So Aries symbol is the ram, and in medical astrology, it rules the head. If you think about rams, what do during the spring? They butt heads. Okay. And yeah, that impulsive quality. Remember, this is a Mars ruled sign. And so that impulsive quality that Justin mentioned is very much there. It's like Aries has a very immediate quality. Okay. It's not waiting around for anything, because as a fire sign, it's like that spark. Boom, right there. We're very much in the present moment when we are doing Aries stuff.
Yeah.
Well,
And
and today we're doing the three of us, and I've only been doing shows with one other astrologer, so this is something new that I'm doing. So I really appreciate you both joining me today to do this. So, and this is our 100th show. So welcome to our
cool.
100th episode.
Congratulations on that, Liz. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Did you want to add something more about
Oh,
Aries?
I was going to say a
Justin?
good, as positive aspect of I've always noticed about Aries is that they tend to, if you have a lot of planets in Aries, they tend to be the people that, when the going gets tough, they pull up their bootstraps and move forward. There seems to be an empowerment that comes with Aries and an individualism. And so they sometimes can be very good at encouraging others or empowering others to step up and get going, with things.
Take
To add
charge
to
and
that,
leadership.
yeah, yeah. To add to that, actually, one of the things that I've noticed when doing astrology pertaining to organizations, as I think I've mentioned to Liz before, I cut my teeth on synastry astrology by looking at the astrology of volunteer organizations and the people within those. And one of the things I noticed is that volunteers, there are a lot of people with strong Aries placements. They
That's
got
really
that get up and
interesting.
go and the desire to be the hero. That's really what it is. It's a hero archetype thing. They want to be the hero. They want to help people. So they're going to get right down in the trenches and do that work on behalf of organizations that need that work. So,
Yeah.
Okay, so Justin, would you cover the mundane rules?
Yeah, so when we look at the Aries Ingress, it's a very important chart as a mundane event because mundane astrology, of course, looks at groups or nations. And so the Aries Ingress gives us an outlook for the coming year of how things will go for basically the collective in whatever location that the chart is done for. And so there is a rule that goes back to traditional astrology that the sign of the Ascendant in the Ingress chart shows how long it is good for. So if it is a fixed sign, let's say like Taurus or Scorpio or Leo or Aquarius, then that chart is good for the whole year until the next Aries Ingress. If it's a mutable sign, then it's good for 6 months, and then that means that then you're going to look at the Libra Ingress come October, and then if it's a cardinal sign, then it's good for 3 months, and then of course you'd have to pull a Cancer Ingress chart and then see what that looks like. So this just goes back to traditional astrology, and these are really kind of it's just one of the rules that we look at for mundane.
Do you want to add anything, Simon?
nah, he covered it very well.
And Justin, I'll let you lead us off on this because you added this part, which I think is very useful information.
Yeah, so I put in on this slide and then the next slide, just from a mundane astrology perspective, what the houses kind of represent as we're looking at a group or collective or nation as these charts represent, or a region. And so a lot of this is very similar to what we may see in horoscopic astrology with natal charts, but it takes a more high level approach. So instead of, the first house being the individual, as we would say in the natal chart, here it's the country and its inhabitants. Second house, of course, is values and resource. So it's bank, stock market, and trade. Third house, again, is communications, like the natal chart, but this one is a little bit more, again, towards the collective. So larger communications in the collective, social media, transportation, in-country transportation more. And then, of course, the postal service, right? Fourth house, land, crops, mines, buildings. Fifth house is entertainment, children. Also, gambling, casinos falls under fifth house. And if you look in some of the older writings on it, the the 5th house was the House of Lords, whereas the 11th house was a House of Commons. So if we look at that with the let's say the American system, then the 5th house is the Senate, and the 11th house is the 11th house is the House, the Congress. 6th house is public health, civil service and unions, the working class. 7th house is foreign policy, political, and commercial relationships. 8th house is finance with countries, and again, this is where tariff and trade also comes in. 9th house is shipping. Long, like if we were talking about like the Panama Canal, that would fall under 9th house, or larger shipping things, or aerospace. The courts also is 9th house, as we see, law, justice courts, universities, and also scientific institutions, because they're actually, science is playing a big part right now, and that's 9th house. 10th house is actually the head of the nation, or the authority figures and heroes. I heard Simon use that word, and I was like, oh yeah, heroes, or famous people is 10th house, or authority figures. And also it's the house of reputation. So the group or nation's reputation falls under 10th house. And 11th house, of course, is legislation and community and house. And then the 12th house is prisons, criminals, the welfare state, secrets, and spies falls under there. And there's a lot more keywords under here, but I didn't have enough room, so I thought I just put the highlighted ones. I don't know if any of you two have any comments or additions to that.
My addition to the 12th house would be hospitals.
Yes.
And if we're looking at things that affect public health care, then we would need to look at that along with the 6th house, the axis of the 6th and 12th.
Yep. And actually we'll see that in one of today's charts. So yeah.
Yeah, I find it fascinating, and I like that you added keywords, because that helps our audience to learn more. So I appreciate that, Justin. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
And then the planets in the mundane chart. We'll let you take it away, Justin.
Yeah, no. And so the planets in the mundane chart, of course, again, sort of similar to what we may say archetypically, for natal. Of course, the sun represents in the chart the authority figures. A lot of astrologers, I don't know about you two, but I've noticed a lot of astrologers go right to the moon when we look at Ingress charts, because that represents kind of the public's mood and attention during that period where we're going to be focused at. Mercury, of course, is media, trade, and postal. Venus, women's issues, the arts. Mars represents military conflicts. Jupiter, law, justice, and religion, of course. Saturn is the elderly and farmers. And then, of course, Uranus represents political tension and riots. And it's interesting about Uranus and Neptune. Uranus, there is some systems that say that Uranus represents the more left, the more right, which is fascism, individualism, versus Neptune, which is collectivism and communism, socialism. And Neptune also represents vice and fraud. And of course, our good friend Robert has a lot to say about Neptune, especially as it moves into Aries. And then, of course, Pluto is about violence, pandemics, and regeneration and big transformations. So anything that you all want to add to that?
So a couple of things. Venus can also relate to our finances, which is kind of important when we're discussing mundane concerns and the economy and all of that. I mean, there are other factors that will play into that. Certainly Mercury can relate to trade and commerce, but Venus is going to relate to, what is our financial gain or loss at the end of that, depending on her condition. Also, Pluto, relates very much to power and wealth. So oligarchy obviously would be a Plutonian subject. And Plutonian power tends to be of the institutional variety.
Yep.
Thanks for adding all that, because that helps set the stage. So are we ready to start with the chart? So we have the spring equinox, and it's also called the Aries Ingress. And this chart is universal time at Greenwich. And we have a Gemini ascendant, an Aquarius midheaven, and then in pink is the sun circled. And we'll go on to the aspects unless you guys want to talk about this chart. So who wants to start?
Go ahead, Simon.
Okay. Well, as you can see, first of all, there's a lot going on. So I'm going to try to not get too down in the weeds with it, but
Please do. Both of us have a lot of Virgo in our chart, so let's go for it.
Yeah. So, speaking of Virgo, and we just recently had the eclipse in Virgo. Mercury ruled Virgo, and here we see with this this chart at Greenwich Mean Time, we have the ascendant with Jupiter conjoining it are also in a Mercury ruled sign of Gemini. Okay, and so right off of the bat, that ties this ingress into the Mercury retrograde. And I think that that's important for us to consider, because that suggests then that for the next 6 months of this particular chart, that we are looking at the potential for big information, big data to dominate, but in a potentially confused or discombobulated way. So we're looking at the potential for more misinformation, which has been the plague of the Jupiter and Gemini period. But also the need to revisit things, the need to fact check, the need to go back and see what exactly happened over here. If I'm going to be basing my actions on this data, I'd better be certain that, the T's are crossed and the I's dotted. Okay. So that right off the bat, that's where we're starting from. Then we're looking here at, remember, even though the sun has ingressed into Aries, it is still within a few degrees of that north node in Pisces, and Neptune in Pisces. And Neptune, of course, also can bring confusion. Now, on the plus side, it can bring a big vision. And I do think that the sun here entering Aries so close to Neptune, right before Neptune's going to head into Aries at the end of this month, that the sun is effectively heralding the big vision or the big idea, the imagination that Neptune can spark. And spark suddenly because it's Aries, because it's fiery. Okay. So here we've had Neptune in this space of being in Pisces, emphasizing the boundarylessness of Pisces, the yes, some confusion, but also the sense of what the Germans call Weltschmerz, which is world sorrow. Okay, all of the intense, challenging, emotionally fraught things that are going on all over the world. Okay, and our awareness of them. The sun has been in that space, this oceanic sense of all that is ending, as I've talked about before, like the extinction events that are going on right now, with so many species dying off, the things that are very challenging for our world. And yet, this is that ending period, right? This is that we want to wrap that energy up. We cannot continue to live forever in that space of like, oh, all is heavy and miserable. And so here the sun now enters into Aries, heralding that massive shift of Neptune into Aries, of our imagination into a space that is active, that is creative, that wants to be the big damn hero and solve the big problems. Okay, so I find this very, very beautiful. Okay, especially because it's at that north node. And yes, the north node can be challenging. I think it's, Austin Coppock has talked about it being a haunted place. Okay. But even though it can feel haunted and it can feel fateful and that's some intensity there, it is still, where are we going? What is our forward motion? What is our karmic arc leading us to? Now, right now, it is showing us a lot of the world sorrow that we're in danger of drowning in if we're not careful. And yet there's that vision, that big vision of Neptune heralded by the sun that's saying, we can imagine something better. And then when Neptune is conjoined by Saturn, which is going to be coming up next year, we're looking at the potential to make that real, to make the ideal real. Okay.
So can I say something really quickly?
Yeah, heck yeah.
So before I forget, I want to just overlay. I totally agree with you on that Jupiter representing that misinformation, especially in where it's at in the chart, which is in the 12th house there. So there's an issue there with that. And then, of course, again, the sorrowness of our particular state. Of course, I agree. It's because we got, Neptune there and the sun with a couple of malefics, Rahu, the demon head, and Saturn. Yeah. So there is this, and again, I think, there's a positive in this, but there's also a caution because that sun representing authority figures out there, collective, are playing a role here with a lot of that misinformation and grift as Neptune moves into Aries, and of course the North Node, the demon head, is right there along with that. So I just wanted to say I totally agree with everything you said, and especially that Jupiter really jumped out to me because that's opposing the moon, as we know. For this is the universal chart, right? So that moon, the collective worldwide, seems to be focused. And this is what I thought was interesting because it's in the house of health. So there's something here that's going to show up this year worldwide, even though we're still dealing with the effects of COVID. I still feel there's some focus about health here worldwide, because the moon is there in that house. And so again, there's a collective focusing on health, unions, working issues, but it's opposing that Jupiter you're talking about, which is about what are people believing about their health, and is there misinformation there? So that's what I just want to point out before you go to the next aspect.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting with regard to the what you're mentioning about health. So this ingress is falling within eclipse season, right? It is sandwiched between eclipses. And that moon, the lunar eclipse, the total lunar eclipse in Virgo is very concerned with health. Okay. And then of course the solar eclipse is going to be at, I think it's around
9 degrees Aries.
Yeah. I was like trying to remember because it's so close to my moon. I'm like, it's on one side or the other of my moon, but I know it's there. But anyway, that Jupiter is opposing that moon, and that moon is in a Jupiter ruled sign. And this Jupiter is in its detriment, but it's also ruling all that stuff in Pisces classically. Okay. Yeah. Neptune may be the transcendental modern ruler, but Jupiter is still that classical ruler of Pisces. And I really feel like there is this bigness that we already associate with Pisces is then getting compounded both on our emotional levels and on our mental, intellectual levels. Okay. And and Jupiter being in Gemini, that's it squares Pisces. It's not squaring it by degree, but it is squaring it by sign. And of course, Saturn and Jupiter are going to have one more square after 2 previous squares. So there is that kind of tension going on there. I actually view, even though Saturn does contribute to the weightiness of the feeling of that Pisces stellium that's been going on, that both Mercury and Venus are going to rejoin, right? Even though Saturn has contributed to that feeling of weight, Saturn also has been encouraging us to engage in some emotional maturity. It has actually been fortifying on that level. Saturn in Pisces can very much relate to the Eight of Cups in tarot, okay? And this kind of sense of emotional exhaustion, right? Yeah. And yet Saturn can also be that reminder of, nothing lasts forever. Yes, there are big changes that are going on, but if we are patient, if we are persistent, if we exercise some emotional maturity and self-discipline, we're going to survive it. Okay. Yep. Okay. So now let's go to some more of these aspects. I've talked a bit about that stellium, but we've also got this T-square. Remember how we were just talking about Jupiter and the moon? Okay. Well, the T-square then is with Ceres, who's in the early degrees, the first decan of Pisces. And Ceres relates to our hunger, okay, what nurtures us and how we nurture others, but also very much relates to grief, as in Demeter grieving for Persephone, okay? And so I do feel like with the concerns that may be raised by that Jupiter-Moon opposition, that there is that need to acknowledge, where is our grief? What are we hungering for? Where do we feel like we need more nourishment? And I am concerned about what that bodes for in terms of food security, with regard to, how are the markets doing? What's the economy doing? All the disruptions, the economic disruptions that we've been experiencing. And we do see that in terms of already how it's being reported within the media and how our government is talking about it. I believe it was, I can't remember if it was the new Secretary of Agriculture, or I don't remember who she was. One of these various people in the new Trump administration who was basically saying, if the price of eggs is too much for you, you should get some chickens. And of course, local zoning is not going to accommodate that for lots of people. I live in an apartment. I can't have chickens, but so there's that conflict of, Jupiter can relate to our leadership.
Yeah.
The moon, the will of the people. How do we feed the people?
Point out my thoughts on that square. And I think, again, I agree with you. The series to me is always more, is about the farming, the food, and the fact that it's squaring the moon in the house of health here. But again, there's that Jupiter playing misinformation and stuff there in the 12th house. I do feel that this is because there was something coming up about food additives and stuff. So this is, again, I think a focus that people are going to keep a track of what's going on with our food, and that, especially with that Ceres moon square.
Yeah. Also, Ceres being in Pisces right now, for some reason that calls to mind, I think it was in January, Trump did this whole thing of releasing massive amounts of water in California into that the farmers are going to need when it gets dry. But he did this kind of premature release of it. And I do think that there is a potential for water issues to factor in to our food supply.
Yeah.
That's just what I am getting off of that series.
So can I go to the grand trine here? I wanted to say a couple of things about this. So I always, because I have a grand trine on my natal chart, so I always go to the big trine first, And this one stuck out to me because it is that Pluto Uranus triangulation, which is big, and with the South node Ketu, which is the nodes are disruptive. They bring disruption, especially the South node. And so this I saw was interesting because that Pluto being up in the ninth house of laws and court systems, but the fact that it was triangulating Uranus in that 12th house, and Jupiter's right there with it. There's this almost feels like to me that there's going to be a lot of stuff that's hidden because we got Uranus and Jupiter right there. A lot of stuff that's hidden around laws and courts that a lot of undertakings that we're not going to see. But that it's definitely a transformative. There's going to be changes with laws around the world. And also because the foreign travel there with that, I see that this means that there's going to be a lot of, because we're with Neptune going to Aries, it's a change of power structures around the world. That there's going to be a large realignment in the world around migration. And so I think we are looking at how many Americans are already trying to leave the country. I mean, there's going to be migration patterns that play into this. And I think because the Jupiter and Uranus are hidden there in that 12th house, like the house of secrets, that there's going to be a lot of people that probably try to go off the grid or get out from under there's going to be a lot that happens that we don't see with these migrations and people moving and going here or there. And so that's what I kind of get out of that. What do you all get out of that?
I would agree. There's a lot happening behind the scenes, so to speak. It's like, maybe people are preparing to make the changes, but they're just not talking about it, and it's not visible from an outward appearance at the moment. Simon?
I also think that with Pluto in the ninth there, and that Uranus in the 12th, so Uranus can relate to activism, and I'm concerned with Uranus in the 12th because that goes very much hand in hand with activists being detained, rounded up, imprisoned. What is his name? I'm probably going to butcher. Mahmoud Khalil, I think is his name.
Who, by the way, this is crazy because he's a legal resident. So he's being arrested for a political point of view. And I agree with you. That's I think that Uranus, which represents that, can be some fascism, but secrets, that's like secret prisons. It's like, that disruption right there,
And what I think a lot of people, again, going back to the notion of things being hidden or not being talked about very much, in terms of how things are being reported or whether they're being reported at all, is something that I recently saw is that among the people who've already been rounded up as immigrants to be detained and potentially deported, that there's already 47,000 plus people who have been detained and rounded up, and that the current infrastructure for holding folks is already at its limit.
Right.
And yet I'm not hearing a lot of that being reported. And so I think that this is one of the things that we're potentially looking at, is that there's not necessarily going to be a lot of information out there publicly in the open about these kinds of arrests, detaining, people being detained and all of that.
I was going to say a positive aspect of this. I was looking at that Pluto being up there. which that is the house of scientific institutions and universities as well, which means there's a lot of disruption there. But this can also mean a real big, with Pluto and Aquarius there, a lot of big scientific advancements as a part of this disruption. So that's a positive thing, I think, there. And the fact that it's, Uranus and Jupiter in the 12th house, this does mean that we're going through some transformation, I feel, in our consciousness. This is a test, and so I think there's some positive things that could come out of this.
Actually, one of the things that like really kind of jumped out at me as you were saying that is that, because Pluto does relate to wealth, one of the things that I've been seeing when people are responding to the changes that are going on, the disruptions that are going on, is that more people are really trying to align their spending and their investments, if they are capable of investing, their finances in things that align with their higher consciousness, things that align with what they believe is of the most priority. And that includes with regard to, funding science, funding education, that kind of thing, because that's being attacked on one side, on the institutional side. But then in terms of individuals and how they're talking about this stuff, they're very much now looking at things from the standpoint of, okay, I'm going to change my spending habits so that my spending reflects my values.
Yeah. I think it's going to disrupt it. We're going to come up with new pathways of doing things. So, Liz, what do you think? You've been so quiet here.
Well, I agree with what both of you are saying. And then, with that South Node attached to that, it feels like part of the issue is like looking at things of how they've worked in the past. And some people want to stay stuck in the past, but it's like we have to learn from the past, I would say. Do you guys have anything else to say about that South Node being attached to that Grand Trine?
Well, there's also, what are we letting go of? What do we need to let go of? What do we need to move away from? And, as I've said before, Pluto shows what's toxic. So if Pluto's showing what's toxic, in its connection with the South Node, it's also showing what needs to be let go of.
Well, and I think, one of the things when we look at Ketu, the South Node, it actually it's in the older Hindu tradition, in some of the earlier Persian and Hellenistic astrology, that South Node is considered like not seen. It doesn't have a mind. Mm-hmm. It's the body of the demon head, or the serpent, the dragon's head, right? So it's almost sometimes considered like hidden. That's why it's the past. And it's so I think there's that, along with Uranus and Jupiter here, means that we really got to go deep. I mean, this is big transformational change, and there's a lot of people that don't see, or there's a lot that's hidden here, that when you're talking about that, we're each individual going through our transformation, I think we really have to go deep and really see what's not said, and look deeper. I think this is a really, so to answer your question, Liz, I think this is a really, really deep trying that's asking us to go deep and look at what's hidden.
Absolutely.
It's also, I think, relates to what is our character. And the reason I say that is because with both Uranus and Jupiter in the 12th house, the 12th house is a place of isolation, a place where we have to address things on our own, without assistance from others, without others ever seeing it. It's where our private struggles are. And it is said that, character is who you are in the dark. To quote Buckaroo Banzai, character is what you are doing when nobody can see you. Okay. And here it's this combination of like the freedom and insight, or insight, somewhat inspiration as well, of Uranus, but with Jupiter, because Jupiter in Gemini may relate to, right now is relating to lots of big information. But remember, Jupiter's where we keep the faith. Okay. And so working out things within our own heads, we need to find a way to keep the faith, despite being bombarded with, sudden shocking change and electrifying information that may or not be correct. Still, we have to find some way to keep the faith, to carry forward, to do the deep work, do that transformational work. And doing that inner work is then going to prepare us to do that outer work. Part of that deep work also right now is involving, we've got that square going on between Mars and Chiron.
I was wondering when you're going to get to that.
Yes.
I'm chomping at the bit to talk about that, but go ahead.
Yeah. That's a really big factor right now. The U.S. is going through its Chiron return. Okay. And so Chiron in Aries is ruled by Mars. So it's squaring off against the ruler of Mars, or off against its own ruler, squaring off against Mars. And Mars is in Cancer now, which is ruled by that moon. Okay, all these ways that they're interconnected. Yeah. So Mars in Cancer is, of course, considered to be in its detriment, because Mars likes to do disruptive Marsy things. Okay. It, has a severing action, whereas Cancer is, what draws us closer together. Okay. And, is familial, is our close circles, right? But Mars in Cancer then wants to defend what is ours, wants to defend our families and our close circles of friends, and what creates emotional safety for us. You will note that during Mars's transit of Cancer, there's been a lot of people kind of, in response to the chaos and fear that is going on in the zeitgeist, that people are going, how do I protect what matters to me? How do I take care of my friends and family, make sure that they're going to be safe? Okay. But going up against Chiron in Aries has been showing us, that whole bootstrapping notion and its toxicity, that we are not capable of doing everything on our lonesome. We can't just, kind of ram through things, those ram horns, push through every obstacle. Okay. That we have to find ways to be able to connect that are not just, reinforcing the echo chambers. Okay.
Right. And I agree. And, I was going to say that, that Chiron in Aries, and we actually done a couple of shows on this, Liz and I did, and Sue as well, because it's about valuing individuals. And that's a big problem we have right now in the collective, is people are valuing it. And it's also us valuing ourselves and not being nihilistic or self-sabotaging, and I think, you speak to the values there. Of course, that's Mars in the second house of values. So I think, and anytime we have that, and it's sort of this concept of, in Hindu Jyotish astrology, which is Gadanta, which is this, when a planet goes from a water sign to a fire sign, there's this steam. So there's a definitely, that's a very interesting energy there. I think it definitely is how we heal that, and the collective here is actually focused, like you said, on our emotions. What our values are very in touch with our emotions. Our emotions in touch with our values, and we're being challenged who we value, and I think it's about just going back to that for us, nurturing our values and valuing others, and I think that's how we heal this aspect there.
Right, and a lot of Chironic lessons are. Oh, sorry, Liz.
I was just going to say that Mars in the second house in Cancer is like looking at our family values. And with the Chiron in Aries, it's like, are we wounded from how we were raised, or have they wounded us, and is it time to like have new family values and what nowadays constitutes a family? It's way different than it was when I was a child. So
Right.
it's changing constantly. Go ahead.
I do think it speaks to intergenerational trauma. And for our country in particular, it should be noted that Trump has Mars at his ascendant, if I remember correctly. And so, there is that sense of Mars wounding that's going on, toxic masculinity, the notion of the strong man who's going to somehow solve our problems. And yet Chiron and Aries is like, you can't solve the problem with the thing that created it, right? That we need to find ways to address some of that toxicity.
Right. But I think there's a positive aspect to this. I mean, if there was ever a sign to square or aspect Chiron and Aries, it's something in Cancer. Right?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So I think there's a positive aspect of this, that we could look at this as on the other side, that the glass is half full, that this Mars, and I know one of us has Mars in Cancer. So I mean, this is very nurturing. This can be very nurturing to healing us and valuing others. So,
well, it's taking action through nurturing.
Right.
And one of the keys with Chiron is that chironic wounds are the ones that we can't just like fix them for ourselves, right? We don't just go, oh yes, I've got this problem and I'm going to get it fixed. Okay. Instead, we have to kind of sit with it, and we do better with it when we interact with other people with similar problems and share what has been our experience around our wounding. And they in turn share that experience around their wounding of those similar problems. And in the process, we find ways to better deal with the wound. It may not go away. It may always be with us, but we are in a better position to handle it and figure out, workarounds.
Right.
There is wisdom within the wound when we are looking at a chironic wound. And since that Chiron is in Aries, it's also about, okay, how do we start over or renew or, have a new beginning surrounding the areas where we have been wounded. And as Liz pointed out, this can relate to family dynamics. This can relate to what kinds of origins do we have? What's our superhero or supervillain origin story, right?
Right.
And so there's this potential for new beginning there.
Right. And I would just say one thing, because I know we got a couple other charts to look at, but I would just say one thing. I think it's interesting here that, to answer your question, a lot of it's about local and regional here.
Yes.
Because that sun and that stellium is all in the 11th house, which is back to our own city councils, our legislation, and more back to the community here with that.
And I want to go ahead.
I want to make a comment about Chiron. Most people know Chiron from the wound from his student that he was shot with a poisonous arrow, but his original wound was being rejected by both his mother and his father. So, being square to the Mars and Cancer really highlights to me that the family, your family of origin, and whatever your story is. And our parents did the best they could because they learned from their parents and passed it down. But now it's like, it's okay to talk about it and work on healing those things, where before it's like, no, that's a secret you keep in the closet.
Right.
Yeah. And that is, I think you very much hit a nail on the head there with that, because keeping these things silent so that our community wouldn't know about what was hurting within our families has been a toxic dynamic for a long time. Lots of us who have had, family struggles and toxic family dynamics, we're always encouraged to, keep it hidden, and in the process not get the help of the community that could have helped everybody involved.
Right.
And so I do feel like potentially, as you said, Justin, there is like this really positive potential here, that the best possible squaring aspect for this Mars Chiron square is with Mars in Cancer, because it's saying take action within the community that's going to help you to not feel so helpless and overwhelmed and scared of being weak and scared of not being able to solve the problem, which is a big factor for Chiron and Aries. The fear of I don't have the executive function to handle this. I don't have the actual capability. I'm not the hero, right?
Yep, exactly. So we got a couple more charts to look at, don't we, Liz?
Yeah. Does anybody want to talk about the Saturn sextile Uranus, or we're just going to skip that one?
I don't have anything to say about that. I think we kind of beat this chart to a dead horse, to be honest with you.
Okay, we'll go on. Okay, thank you both. And we're going to go on to the next one. So this is the spring equinox Aries Ingress chart for Eastern Daylight Time in Washington, D.C. And the ascendant is at 8 degrees Aquarius, and the midheaven is at 28 degrees Scorpio. And in this chart, we see that sun in the second house. So one of you start and talk about what, how it might change.
I was going to say, after we look at the Washington chart and then we look at the Seattle chart, we got sort of a summation of some themes. I just wanted to point out a couple of things that jumped out to me about this. The United States chart here is, of course, the moon is in the 10th house. So I think the collective is going to continue to be focused on authority figures, president, whoever else is up there, Musk, that's going to be, because the moon, the collective, is focused on reputation and authority figures. Interestingly, the sun, as we're talking about values, I think there's again a large focus on values and economy here, and the tariffs. So this is where we see, the Ketu's in that 8th house, the Rahu's in the north node's in the 2nd house. So we see everything here is about money, economy, and that. So that jumped out with me. Of course, it's a fixed sign ascendant. So this chart's going to last us collective for the United States all the way till April of next year. And the last thing I will say was a couple of things there is in mundane astrology. If you have a planet that's on the cusp of the 4th house, it's to be aware of weather events. And in this case, we see a Uranus down there, close to the IC cusp of the 4th house. So that we need to be aware of natural events this year. And last but not least, Mars. Go back to Mars in Cancer there. That's in that 6th house. So I guess I feel that there's, that's because Mars does represent conflict, and there's the house of the civil service and health as well, but it's a civil service that's being fired in mass. That there's and it's in Cancer though. So there's something about, I think, that will touch the collective about, wait a second, at some point we're going to probably, the family or the concept comes into play here, the emotions of the Cancer comes into play about what's going to happen there. So that was the things that really jumped out to me about this chart. What about you two? And Liz, you've been so quiet.
Simon, do you want to make a comment?
That Mars being in the 6th house really suggests to me the need for daily action. Okay. Also, I think that one of the factors, going back to what you were saying, Justin, about the civil service people being fired, remember those folks all have families. They all have families that are being affected. And so I think there's going to continue to be an emphasis on, what is the impact upon these civil servants and their families, and then all of the families who are impacted by them not being able to do their jobs, by the defunding of programs that support families, food stamps. Okay.
And Chiron in the second house, do we value them still?
Do we value them still? The other thing I think that is very important that feels emphasized to me about this chart is that Pluto is, just within, it's about 5 degrees away from that ascendant, okay, from the 12th house. And so that is hidden power, hidden wealth that is impacting this chart in a big way, okay?
Yeah.
Impacting the whole of the year ahead of us. And remember that Mars is reapplying to the opposition with Pluto. We had the first of 3 oppositions with Pluto. That was the day before the US election. We had the second one was toward the beginning of January. And now this is going to be the third in that series. And it's happening at the end of April. I think it's like April 27th, something like that. Maybe 26th. And that Mars Pluto, when we see Mars Pluto oppositions, and full disclosure, I have one natally. So, there is the kind of deep psychological material, and our obsessions and our compulsions, our drives, our unconscious drives, our hidden material that in turn is pushing, fueling, motivating our actions. Okay. And on a societal level, with that Pluto in the 12th, that does, among other things, relate to prisons, that relates to people being, pulled off the streets and out of their homes and put in isolation from everybody else. Okay. That in turn then fuels what is the community response? What are the families trying to double down on protecting themselves and their loved ones on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I want to give you some good positivity about this chart about that. So the 4th house also, because it's opposite the house of authority, and the 10th house is the opposition, the public opposition. And here we see Jupiter. That's that Jupiter moon opposition. So this does mean there's this there is a potentiality here with Jupiter and Gemini in the 4th house opposing the moon in the 10th house, a strong communicative opposition to that moon focused authority. So there does seem to be sort of a big groundswell here of opposition at some point with Jupiter in the 4th house. So I think there's a positive thing to that, actually.
I very much agree with you on that, because among other things, what we're seeing is people going offline to communicate in person about the stuff that's concerning them, and organizing and engaging in local community activism in order to try to address these things. And that Jupiter helps us carry the faith, but also can, interestingly enough, relate to leadership and authority. But think about it in terms of leadership and authority on a very local, personal level, and in terms of who we are in private. Yes, the 4th house can relate to home and family, but it also relates to who are we in private. And so again, this is a time for us to muster our inner leader.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, and I want to say something about Uranus on the I see there again close, because I have that in my chart. This does tell me that migration, because Uranus on the cusp of the 4th house here does mean a disruption or change where people live. So I do think this relates to, still, we're going to have a lot of internal migration in the country, between where people can find jobs and where they want to move to community with the change of structure. So this is kind of something to watch, though, because this can mean some, I'm not saying states saying, okay, we're going to, secede, but there's something important about Uranus there. And I'm curious what you both think about Vesta there in the 9th house, the house of law, religion, and what you all see with the Vesta and Scorpio there. And Liz, you're still too quiet.
You're used to me talking more. Oh, I don't know that there could be a change in religions, I would say, and laws. What about you, Simon?
So two things. One, that Uranus in Taurus, Uranus in Taurus has been, Uranus likes to be able to have movement, right? Taurus is so not about movement. And as I often like to remind people, when Uranus went into Taurus, Kilauea erupted. So there is something seismic in terms of Uranus action within Taurus. I would be concerned about earthquakes. I would be concerned about mudslides. You were talking about weather phenomenon, but I'm also looking at natural phenomenon in general.
Yeah.
There's also the, you've talked about migration within the United States. And one of the things that we are seeing is people trying to get out of red states if they are people who are going to be impacted by things like anti-trans laws or anti-abortion laws. There's literally women going, I don't want to stay in this state because I cannot trust that my health concerns are going to be of importance. There's women who are dying from, sepsis as a result of not getting abortion care. And so people who are concerned about that and who are like, I'm sorry, I can't continue to fight the good fight from within this space are now trying to migrate to go to other states where they feel like their rights are going to be protected. So there's that. Yeah. But you talked about that Vesta. Vesta here is opposing that. And one of the things that, Vesta as an asteroid has some lovely significations that I do like, can relate to our sacred spark, our inner flame. Where is our focus? But we have to remember, as I've said many times before, Vesta is the Roman version of the goddess of the hearth. And so Vesta is not the hearth of the home. Vesta is the hearth of the empire. Okay. Now, we can certainly look at hearth of the empire having the potential to do some good in terms of the ninth house, because then that suggests that the courts will try to uphold what are the ideals of the body politic, what are the ideals of our nation. Okay.
Yeah, I like that interpretation. I like that.
we have seen the courts pushing back on some of the more egregious excesses of the current government. But do remember, it still is in support of empire.
Yeah.
And it's in Taurus. So it's going to be focused on, or not Taurus, sorry, in Scorpio. And so it's going to be focused on, among other things, the power dynamics and the control issues of the empire. Okay. Yep. And it is moving into applying to the opposition with Uranus.
Yeah.
And so we're then looking at, among other things, what constitutes, protest that is going to be supported, and what constitutes stuff that, those who are still clinging to the notion of the empire maintaining in a certain way, that they may not be able to help forward the protest and or liberation of the people. So, for example, with the continuing resolution that we're seeing the government trying to avoid shutting down, and there are folks who have been saying that the Democrats should not vote in favor of the continuing resolution, that they should have filibustered and done everything they could to prevent it, and yet you see the Democratic leadership going, oh no, we can't do anything that radical and disruptive because it goes against the norms and standards that they are still clinging to, even though those in power are not. So
Right.
I think we're going to continue to see that kind of push-pull going on in terms of folks who are, struggling for more freedom and fighting back against the changes that are occurring, or trying to make better changes,
Right.
going
I was
up
gonna
against those standards.
Right. And I was also gonna just to because we got one more chart to look. I want to say something about the Uranus one more time. Is that that is also third house of postal, the postal system, and we've got Uranus there, which is a higher vibration of Mercury in it, and it's in Taurus, as you pointed out. So I do feel that, and this is also in country transportation and travel, and Uranus is right there. So I guess there's going to be, that just tells me a lot of economics around economy with transportation of goods as an issue in the country, but also the postal service here and what happens to that. But I think this actually is a positive thing. There's can be something positive out of this. I'm trying to look at the positive aspects here a little bit. Is that that because I have Uranus on my on my IC, so this is actually gives us the change to go inward more and to really use our creativity, because Uranus is that planet of rebellion, revolution, and change, and shows how you're unique. And so this is for us to go more inward. Again, I'm talking a lot about depth in this chart, like the last chart, but going in more depth and really tapping our creativity as we deal with the changes in society.
Uranus very much relates to insight, but also genius. And I do think that it is very beneficial to have a planet associated with insight and genius down by the IC, because the IC not only relates to, our home and family and roots, although it's coming from the third house, so there's the community orientation of it, but also the Akashic records, our ancestral wisdom. And so here we have this potential for sudden insight and genius to come to us through our ancestral roots, through the Akashic records, through that collective unconscious.
Yep, I agree.
Okay, now we're going to switch to the west coast of the United States. So the Aries Ingress at Pacific Daylight Time, and this is the Seattle chart, and we have the Ascendant in Sagittarius, and the Sun is in the third house, and the midheaven is at 12 degrees Libra. So it's all changed, and now we have a mutable sign. So this chart is good for 6 months. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. And so I wanted, just if I could start, Liz, I just wanted to point out a couple of things. What I thought was interesting, because the third house deals with, of course, interstate or between state transportation, and not foreign travel or transportation, which is ninth house, but third house is transportation. And what's interesting here is that we see on the West Coast, because the West Coast chart, there's going to be a lot of stuff coming up about transportation. I mean, we see it here in Washington State with the whole ferry system. There's a big change happening with what the governors just did with the ferries. And then with California, there's been a lot of things with the federal government, with what's happening with the high-speed rail, and the California laws on is going to be a big issue this year with California being able to, be able to set the standards for tailpipe emissions. So this does tell me, with the Sun here in the third house, that there's a large focus on our own transportation systems and communications as well. The other thing, a couple of things that jumped out with this chart was the South Node, Ketu, in the ninth house. So I felt that this was going to show that the courts on the West Coast are going to probably play a much more disruptive role in what's happening, because in the United States chart, there was Pluto in that house, but no, that was the world chart. But on the United States chart was Vesta. But here we have the South Node, which is very disruptive. So it seems to be that the courts in the West Coast are going to probably bring some sense of change and disruption. That jumped out to me here.
And the moon is
again,
switched to the 6th house.
What's that?
The moon is switched to the 6th house, or the 12th house, sorry.
Yeah, the 12th house. But it was also interesting here when we look at the opposition that Jupiter was in the last chart. Now we see Jupiter here in the 6th house, which is trade unions, and it's in Gemini, so a lot of communications there. But the thing that kind of got me back to what we've seen, Uranus on the USJ chart on the IC. Here we have Chiron on the IC. So just some food for thought there. Thoughts?
I do feel like that third house, this kind of packed third house here, and Chiron on the IC actually resonates very much with the potential significations of natural, from the last chart, of natural events impacting transportation in particular, but also perhaps a sense of regional stability. You know, when things like when mudslides happen, for example, they often take out highways, right, or local roads. So that's something to potentially watch out for. But also, you know, the impact on commerce in general. I think with these larger events that are going on, and we've got, you know, this Jupiter ruled ascendant, and where is Jupiter? In Gemini, which is Mercury ruled, and so deals with commerce. Okay, and in that 6th house, you know, what are the experiences of you know, your truckers? What are your experiences of your trade union people? And how are they responding to disruptions on the national scale that are impacting on the local scale?
Yep. And, you know, I want to throw, I'm going to go shit because I know we don't have a lot of time, but I want to throw something out to you here. I'm really curious what you two think about, because we know the moon represents the public, the collective on the, and in this case, of course, it's in the West Coast, but it's in the 12th house. And what do you two think that this really shows about the mood of people that are on the left coast here, with the moon in the 12th house here?
I would say that they're not expressing very much. What would you say, Simon?
There's that. Do note that moon is trine the Venus and Mercury retrograde in Aries. Okay. And so, yes, there may be some quiet there, but there's also like reconsidering of connections. And I'm going to tell you the word that leapt into my head the moment you asked that question, Justin. And this doesn't mean it's going to happen. It's just what came to my mind was secession. And regardless of whether or not people can actually muster a secessionist movement or not, whether or not any efforts like that would be successful, I do think that is part of what the private mindset is, of how do we isolate ourselves from the things that are harming us while still, because it's in fire signs, while still, you know, taking action that is helpful for our communities. There's a reconsidering going on in private, quietly, underneath the surface, that in turn can fuel potential action, regardless of what the action is. I do think that secession isn't just a matter of like, oh, we're going to take our state away, but rather, how do we make it so that our state or our region, the West Coast, Cascadia, you know, that bioregion survives. Yeah.
I agree with you because that just falls right on the line with Mercury retrograding in the 3rd house, which is an evaluation, and Venus also retrograding. There's evaluation of how we look, how we communicate, how we're thinking. With both those planets retrograding in the third house, communications and thinking, I agree with you. There's an evaluation going on in our thinking process. And with the moon in the 12th house, I agree with you. I was saying, to me, it was a lot of internal psyche, emotional stuff going on that we're evaluating with that. So I totally agree.
Also, I think it's important to remember two other things about this combination here, that we have both Venus and Mercury in their retrograde are heading back to Cazimi with the sun. Okay, so there's that there is this, they are heading back for the sake of purification and refinement and becoming more purely what those things mean to us. What are our connections? What are our business dealings? What are the alliances that we will or will not make? And note that they are trine Juno as well as the moon. And Juno relates to, yes, our partnerships, but more importantly, what are the promises we have made? What are our oaths? What are our commitments? And what are our commitments that, you know, are willing to make some compromises in order to allow our connections to last, in order to allow our institutions to last. But at the same time, you know, with Juno, that Juno is ruled by that Jupiter in the 6th. So what is going to be the impact of our day-to-day experiences, especially when it comes to information, communication, trade, commerce, again, union activity? How is that going to influence the alliances that we wish to have or wish to build, and those we are going to say, you know what, it is no longer worth the trouble.
Yep. Well, I love that Mars is in Cancer in the 7th house relationship. So I think that's auspicious. I think, yeah, it can be some emotional conflicts, but the fact that it squares Chiron on the IC, I think, again, that's part, you know, square can, as Liz likes to say, a square is requiring action. And I think it's part of that evaluation going on of going back to our roots of value there with Chiron and Aries on the IC. And so I think that can be a positive thing, healing our roots there with that.
I do think that Mars in the 7th can relate to severing of relationships, but I think it is more a matter of prioritizing which relationships we will protect, which relationships we're going to nurture, which relationships really matter to us that we are going to continue to that we're going to go whole hog on. Okay. Yeah. And which ones don't deserve our time or energy anymore, because this is a time when we're looking at the need for prioritization. Remember that Mars is reapplying to the trine with Saturn. And Saturn, of course, is like, there is only so much time in the day. You can't pay attention to it all. You can't put all your energy into it all. You cannot do everything. You know, the Superman or Superwoman is a myth.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And so therefore you have to prioritize.
Yeah, I agree. There's a psychological thing going on here in the West Coast, definitely, with the moon in the 12th house, and with the demon head Rahu there in the 3rd house. It's really, we got to watch what we're thinking here, you know, and evaluating. And so, yeah, I definitely think there's more of a mental thing going on here on the West Coast as we're evaluating. So what do you think?
And also, what are we communicating?
Yeah, exactly. What are we communicating? What do you think, Liz?
Oh, I agree with both of you. And it's like, it's been good to look at the 3 different charts, in my opinion, because it gives, you know, the world one is for everybody. The United States one is for the whole United States. But then if you do live on the West Coast, there's like another aspect to integrate into it all. So, and then we're going to go on here. Justin had a few key points that he wanted to add.
Yeah, so this is actually going to be sort of a summation of what we've all talked about. So again, just for the people from mundane astrology perspective, so the Ingress for the themes for the world, the moon, the public was in the sixth house, so it's focused on health and work issues worldwide, in unions. Again, we should watch health a lot because of that. The sun, which was authority figures for the world chart, and Neptune with the illicit undertakings was conjunct the malefics, Rahu, and Saturn. In the 11th house means the worldwide will be somewhat focused on what's ongoing themes of legislation and also a lot of local communities. And then, of course, that big trine of Pluto, Ketu, South Node, and Uranus means there will be transformation of laws worldwide, because that Pluto was in the ninth house of courts and laws, judicial systems, and transformative scientific advances. So that was just sort of a summation of some of the themes we talked about a little bit for the world.
Okay, and then we have the U.S. and Canada. Go ahead.
Right. So the U.S., Canada, and I was trying to include Mexico, but Mexico City is actually on Central Time. So, maybe next time we can include that, maybe. But in the Canada has its capital in Eastern Time Zone. So the U.S. and Canada are going to go through some similar themes together. And of course, by the way, Canada has an election this year. So again, the moon is in the 10th house there. That collective is focused on authority figures and presidents and prime ministers. Moon in the 10th house for the U.S. means there will be a focus on the country's authority figures. Jupiter in the 4th house opposite moon shows a large opposition to authority. And because Jupiter does inflate and may actually grow larger than we expect. Sun residing in the 2nd house shows that our values will be the theme. And of course, we've talked about that. And Mars in 6th house squaring Chiron in the 2nd house shows that union, civil service will be a big theme, as we're saying now. And this, again, just kind of highlights all the things we've brought up.
Yeah.
And then for the West Coast, Sun is in the 3rd house. Transportation, media, entertainment looks to be a major focus and possible resistance because of all that focus in the 3rd house. And Uranus was also in the 5th house of entertainment and the West Coast. Mm-hmm. So Ketu in the 9th house, courts in the Western states are likely to play a disruptive role in the ongoing national conversation. Mars, Chiron square 7th, 4th house shows themes of political opposition as well. And Chiron right on the cusp of the 4th house, West Coast should pay attention to natural weather events. So that's just sort of a summation. Any comments, ladies, on what we talked about?
That was a good job of summing that all up. I appreciate that you added those slides so we could have a summation. So I want to thank both of you for joining me today, and thanking our audience for watching live and those that'll come back and watch at a later date. And I think that the three of us are going to do the summer solstice, and we'll continue with the equinoxes and the solstices, because this is a new way that I'm doing my show and I really enjoyed it. So thank you both. Is there anything that either of you would like to say in closing?
Go ahead.
I think we have covered so much.
we have, but it's like, it was really fun to jump into the three charts, a completely different way than I've done it in the past. I've, often looked at the universal chart and the West Coast chart because I live here on the West Coast, but to add them all three, I think it was important to add them all.
Yeah, I think it was very useful.
So here's Simon's little advertisement, and I'll let her tell you about that.
So I am available on Patreon, where I write about the astrological transits, and I do custom astrological art for my patrons, particularly solar return art, to give people an image that they can focus on as in order to understand the themes of the year ahead. And like Liz, like Justin, I am a consulting astrologer. So if you are interested in a consultation with me, you can visit my website at iconalchemy.com.
Thank you. And Justin?
Yeah, so I do a combination of Western and Jyotish, or Hindu astrology. And best way to get a hold of me is through my email, justin.elzie@gmail.com. And I just encourage people to go to my YouTube channel, and you can find me there under Astrological Yogi. Also, I'm on Blue Sky under Astrological Yogi, and that's where all on YouTube is where all the shows are at.
Thank you. And we all do consultations. Justin and I have newsletters, and I think we all have YouTube channels too. So we always appreciate your subscriptions and giving us a like. And if you want a consultation, just contact us individually. And then other shows, we have some, there's still a couple of shows on 2025 astrological highlights, and 2 new shows that are coming are Cosmic Connections about relationships and medical astrology. Justin and I do the astrology forecast each month and the full moon forecast, and from time to time the Chiron asteroid series. And Simon joins me on the Astrology Star Sisters, and Simon does the planetary stations with me. And then I also have Chinese astrology decans using astrology and tarot, dwarf planets, fixed stars, Uranian astrology, and the Venus star point. And Justin and I will be on Talk Cosmos on March 30th at 1 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And you can watch that live on my channel or Justin's, or come back at a later time and watch it. It's on the Aries solar eclipse new moon. And again, to get a hold of Simon, it's iconalchemy.com is her website. My website is alightpath.com. And to get a hold of Justin, he has a website, but his email is a good way too, justin.elzie@gmail.com. So again, I want to thank Simon and Justin for joining me today. And we're going to sign off, and we'll be back another time. So goodbye for now, and we'll see you next time.
It was great with both you ladies. Thank you.
Thank you.